In this video, in this section, we're going to talk about classifying angles and some special angle pairs. First thing I want to highlight here are parallel lines and perpendicular lines. And this should not be a new thing to you, but there's some notation that I wanted to point out. So in this first one here, parallel lines, notice that they have these red arrows on the parallel lines right there. That indicates lines being parallel. So tick marks, remember, was congruent segments, whereas the arrows represent parallel lines or segments. Okay, the way that we write that is like this. M is parallel to N, so it's like a tall, skinny 11. Perpendicular also has its own symbol. Okay, so a lot of times you note it with a right angle in the figure, but to show that lines are perpendicular, we write M is perpendicular to N. So it's kind of like an upside down capital T. So those are your symbols for parallel and perpendicular. Real quick, I just want to classify some angles here. We know that acute angles measure anything between 0 and 90. Okay, so it can't be 0, it can't be 90, but anything in between. Obtuse is going to be greater than 90, but less than 180. A right angle measures exactly 90 degrees. Okay, so that word exactly there is pretty important. So it measures exactly 90 degrees, not 90.1 or 90.0001. And again, we can use that right angle marking. And then one that's kind of strange, it's called a straight angle, which just means that it's a line. Okay, so a straight angle is an angle that measures 180 degrees. So there are a couple of angle pairs that we talk about quite a bit in geometry. The first term I want to introduce you to is adjacent angles. Okay, so if two angles are adjacent, that just means that they share a ray. Okay, so that means they're next to each other. Kind of like adjacent hotel rooms typically share a wall in between the two hotel rooms. So here we have adjacent angles. We also have vertical angles. Okay, and vertical angles here, the vertical angles are created when you have two lines that intersect. Okay, so we have two lines that are intersecting. So the vertical angles are the non-adjacent. So non-adjacent angles. So for instance here, angles 1 and 2 are vertical angles. If I were to label 3 and 4, 3 and 4 is another set of vertical angles. And we're going to talk about properties of those vertical angles in another chapter or two. All right, the next two you're probably familiar with, maybe you just confuse them. We have complementary and supplementary. So complementary means you just have two angles whose sum is equal to 90 degrees. Okay, so they could be adjacent or non-adjacent. Okay, so they could be separated like I have them here, or they could be together. So looking like this in terms of they're adjacent, but of course it'd be a right angle because they have to add it to be 90. Supplementary, again, can be adjacent or non-adjacent, but they add up to be 180 degrees. All right, finally, we have the linear pair. Okay, so linear pair, linear sounds like line, pair meaning two. So basically two angles that form a line. Okay, these are both supplementary and adjacent. Okay, they have to be both supplementary and adjacent. This section really was more about introducing you to more vocabulary.